So, on behalf of Axel and Margaret, Axon Johnson Foundation for Public Benefit. It's a long name, yes? So, on behalf of the foundation with a long name, I welcome you to this seminar about life science that we are doing in collaboration with Stockholm City Science Foundation. And these foundations are a little bit interlinked because Axon Johnson's once was one of the funders and one of the founders of the other foundation. But still, this kind of cooperation is very unusual for us. We normally want to do everything ourselves and have total control. And also the topic, life science, is very outside our normal activities because the generation of today have decided to focus not on hard science, but on soft science. So most of our activities is about the humanities, research and dissemination of research. The place you are at, Engelsberg Ironworks, was bought by the family in 1916 and is now in the ownership of the foundation through one of its daughter companies, Nordlund. And this site is also on the World Heritage List by UNESCO because it is the best preserved and most complete example of Swedish iron production from the 17th and 18th century, which was world leading then. It is a fantastic place. And the building in itself, Ventilfabriken, I don't dare to say it in English because it's difficult to pronounce, but I can try. Wolf factory, I would say. Not wolf, wolf factory. We bought it back 5 years ago and we have transformed it to this conference facility. We have about 35 seminars here each year, so we are quite intensive. The most famous of our seminars or conferences is the Engelsberg Seminar, where we gather top academics, international academics, discussing very nebulous issues like what is the West or the visions of future and civilization, that kind of stuff. And the theme of this year is the nation state and the empire. And this seminar has developed to some kind of meeting place for international academics. It's a very popular event. The only program within our foundation that has something to do, at least with your topic, life science, is my own, because I have focused on sustainable cities since 2002. My program is called Urban City Research. And we do a lot of seminars, conferences. I give advice in urban design, and we finance masters in urban design, you can say, in Lund and KTH. We also have a research center at KTH about public space. And we have had a very interesting collaboration with you in Habitat since 2012, called The Future of Places, not cities. This is very important, because if you talk about cities and the future, you will come in a very, very strange environment. So if you ask the great oracle, Google, about the future of cities, this type of images will appear in front of your eyes. They're very much the same, very same colors and the same ideas. It's about big buildings, infrastructure, high tech and mechanic, but no humans. It doesn't matter if we're talking about fantasies or conferences at Oxford or whatever. It's always the same pictures, always the same images of the future. And this image tries to catch, I think, the moment where tracks becomes obsolete, replaced by flying objects in the air. And you can wonder if we really will need cities at all if we can fly like that. Very strange. And this is not fantasies. This is actually suggestions for green city building from different parts of the world. So these images are very deeply embedded in our culture, in books, movies, journals, whatever we do. So as soon as we talk about the future, this type of images appear. And this is very problematic because they are so old. These images are about 120 years old, and they are related to the Second Industrial Revolution and the interpretations that we did from it, like futurism. This is a suggestion by Antonia Sant'Elia, a very famous futurist. It looks like this in the photographic rendering. It could be built today in Dubai. And this is a fantasy about modern town planning by Corbusier. This is the idea of central Paris. And this is problematic because the images of this future that govern our thinking doesn't really match what we are longing for today. So if you ask the millennials, They want main streets, walkability, city life. They prefer small firms, slow food, health, green, and local community. They're longing for this. Yeah, strange. And the fastest growing city type on Earth is the informal settlements. They grow with 2 buses every minute. So in 2050, we will have 2 billion people living in structures like that. That is the future. So we decided to talk about the future of places, what's going on between the buildings, the civic life in our cities. And our goal in our collaboration with UN was to influence the new urban agenda. This was about to be signed in 2016, in October. And we wanted to infuse it with focus on public space. And we gathered about 1,500 people from 100 nations, 700 organizations, and 275 cities. And the UN system is very much about representativity. So with this kind of representation, we had a very strong message. So we actually had a great impact on the new urban agenda that was signed in October last year. It is a lot about writings about public space. And we also influenced the climate goals writings. So it was quite successful. And one of the participating organizations was the World Health Organization. And they are now talking more and more about cities and health and public space and health and such. So I'm coming closer to your world. And we're discussing, walkability, security, loneliness, very high up in the agenda. Stress, air quality, mental health, social inclusion, etc., etc. So finally, I think maybe we will come closer to you. But not today, however. So now I will give the word, I will welcome another welcome speaker, the other host for today, Professor Nordlund. Please enter the scene.
I would like to welcome you all very much on behalf of the Stockholm Science City Foundation onto this seminar on life science. I should give some background why we have this seminar, which is not typical perhaps. And that is in 2009, the board of the foundation decided to put efforts on attracting and facilitating establishment of life science activities to what is today is called Hagastaden. And this work has now been going on for 8 years, essentially. So the 10-year period that was decided is coming to its end. And because of that, the board has initiated strategic discussions on the directions and the focus of future work. So should life science still be a major focus? What other aspects and new disciplines should be included, if so? These are some of the questions. Another question is, of course, in what way could the expertise at Karolinska Institute, at KTH and Stockholm University be contributing and benefit from the work of the foundation? So these are the questions, and the hope for me and my co-workers is that this seminar will contribute, give input to these discussions on the board, so we can come to a clever and good decision for the future work. And with this, I'll hand over to Paul, who will keep the speakers on track and make sure that you all ask interesting questions. Paul.
Right. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Yes, my name is Paul Hudson. I have a research group at KTH, that's the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, and I am the moderator for the meeting. We have some PhD students with us as well who are quite eager to be here, so that's very nice, I think. And the lineup is very impressive. We have distinguished scientists from Sweden, from Asia, and from America. The themes for today appears to be talking a little bit about breakthroughs in the past and how they've helped establish what we think of life science today. Then we will have some perspectives from Europe, from America, and from Asia. And we will also have a panel discussion here where some of the speakers will come up. Our first speaker then that I will introduce is Professor Gunnar von Heijne from Stockholm University. So he has a background in theoretical physics or theoretical chemistry, and is quite a distinguished scientist in Sweden. So we're very excited to hear your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so I thought when I started to think about the past, I thought, well, let's go way back and try to think if there's one signature discovery or event in each of these centuries, what in life science, what would they be as a start? And so in the 18th century, Linnaeus, I think we can proudly say that that was one of the major hallmarks in life science in the 18th century, Systema Naturae. 19th century, Charles Darwin, easy one. 20th century, maybe the structure of DNA. And of course, 21st century, we don't know. However, it's quite easy to predict when this is going, the signature discovery in the 20th century is going to be, because you notice that here is 1758, here's 1859, here's 1953. So obviously, it's going to be 2057 plus minus a few years. Meaning that all the wise minds here today will not be able to predict what this is going to be. But there's going to be something, of course, looking back on the 21st century that we will see as the major event, the major breakthrough also in life science. Of course, science, natural science, is based on methods, on new methods, and new discoveries, and there is an intimate interplay between the two. So I was trying to think back, what would be the new methods, the main methodological breakthroughs in the 20th century, and for what we can say so far in the 21st century, and how did they lead to discoveries, major discoveries, new discoveries. So I just came up with a few things. I'm sure you can add others, but genetics was an early one. Fruit fly genetics and other types of genetics, and of course, in time we also got reverse genetics, where we could basically design the mutation and look at what happened. So this has been a theme throughout the 20th century, I think, with genetics in life science. Biochemistry, of course, also has been going on for the entire 20th century. Various types of purifications, anything from simple paper chromatography that you see on the top, which I did in high school as kind of an exam project, I think. It's not my picture, though, but... and of course, the advanced purification machines like the ECTA machines and other machines that have meant a great deal for molecular life sciences. Cell biology has made great strides in the 20th century, and in terms of methodology, of course, the ultracentrifuge has been a very important one. Very important methodology in cell biology, because it allowed scientists to purify subcellular fractions and to eventually reconstitute functional systems and study them in the test tube. And of course, you have the Svedberg centrifuges. If you visited the Svedberg laboratories in the basement in this building in Uppsala, you probably, the one thing I took away from that visit was all the cracked rotors that was, strewn across the room. And I was happy to see when I Googled that this happens also nowadays, that, rotors explode inside the ultracentrifuges. And so we're still kind of in Svedberg's time in that sense. Structural biology, of course, has been a major strides throughout the 20th century, all the way from the Bragg diffractometer in 1915, I think this picture is from, to the Max 4 synchrotron that was just inaugurated. It's the basic scientific idea is the same from 2015, but of course the technology has had tremendous developments since then. And of course we have other techniques like NMR, electron microscopy, nowadays cryo-electron microscopy, mass spectrometry. So structural biology has really been a major hallmark of life sciences, molecular life sciences in the 20th and the 21st century. And then we move into all the genomics. Sequencing, DNA sequencing. Today, it's only $1,000 per genome, human genome. Tremendous progress in quite a short time, actually, in sequencing technologies. And other types of DNA technology like cloning and PCR and mutagenesis and all these things that have really given us tools of really unexpected and unprecedented power. Microscopy techniques, all the way from Ramon de Cajal, hand-drawn images of neurons, to modern day super resolution microscopy, where one can even bypass the diffraction limit in light microscopy that was, for a long time thought to be an absolute physical limit that you could not surpass. But thanks to modern computing technologies and modern microscopes, you can now get super resolution, get beyond the diffraction limit in light microscopy, and of course also electron microscopy. Something that is fairly recent is single molecule techniques. And this has given really interesting insights into the microscopic actions of things like enzymes, and in this case, ribosomes. So the top panel is just an in vitro translation reaction with ribosomes making protein, and you see that protein accumulates with time. But this, of course, is a bulk experiment in a test tube with billions of ribosomes churning away. Whereas in the bottom panel, you see a single ribosome caught in the act of translation. So a ribosome basically ratchets between two conformations during translation. So with every codon it reads, it ratchets, then it ratchets back, and then it ratchets again. And with this single molecule techniques, you can actually see each little ratcheting. You can see each codon basically being read. And you can time how much time the ribosome spends reading a given codon, a single ribosome. So single molecule techniques it's really amazing that one can look at the action of individual molecules and follow this. And of course, computer science and computation in life sciences has been a major revolution in the last 20 years maybe. The top picture shows you what it looked like when I was a PhD student. That was when we used punch cards. Very sophisticated from a mechanical point of view, these punch card typing machines, and even more impressive were the card readers, I think, when you could have a stack this high of cards and it took like 30 seconds to just read it into the computer. And nowadays, of course, it's just unbelievable what is happening in computing and how much this has meant in the life sciences now. So what about the 21st century? What have we seen so far? Big science, big data. I think that's a major development in life sciences. That's not that old, actually. And I just wanted to contrast the first paper where Sanger published his DNA sequencing method, 3 authors, and one of the human genome papers from the Venter lab. I think this quite nicely illustrates what's going on in the life sciences. So that's on the method side. What about discoveries? Very broad strokes. Metabolism, deciphering metabolism, clearly something that the 20th century did. The central dogma and the whole revolution in molecular biology. Everything we now know about how the molecules, the information-carrying molecules and the proteins, how this is all working inside cells. And of course, coming back to structural biology, biomolecular structure and function. And I just want to remind you about this. I think maybe the best example to show the power of structural biology is the ATP synthase. And now we can basically, although it's a little bit of fantasy here, but we can basically watch it in action, churning out ATP, using up proton gradient inside our mitochondria. So structural biology, structure-function relationships is another signature of 20th century and 21st century life science research. So what about the 21st century? Well, genomics has certainly made its mark already. Not only the human genome, but all kinds of, any kind of genome you care to look at. I looked recently, I think there is in the main databases, there is like 2,000 billion base pair of DNA, and it's growing very fast. It's just unbelievable numbers and the amount of information you find there. And maybe thinking forward, something that we might see more of, I think, is synthetic life. It's a question of when you say life is fully synthetic. Certainly, we're not there yet, and it's kind of not a very well-defined point where you say, okay, now we have created synthetic life, but step by step this is happening. So this cover of Science is a few weeks old, and it reports yeast strains that had, I think, 4 or 5 of their chromosomes were completely de novo synthesized and partly redesigned from the natural chromosomes. It's not a completely synthetic genome, but in a year or two, they'll probably have all the chromosomes completely resynthesized and put back into yeast. Now, what about consequences? What has this meant? This is fantastic science that has gone on, but what about societal consequences? Now, there's one thing that has always struck me about life science from a sort of societal consequences point of view, and compared to IT, for instance. So compared to IT, I think it's fair to say that life science products are mainly invisible. You've seen one pill, you've seen them all. And you don't really know what's inside. You just get, you get this little pill box from your physician, and hopefully you get better. But you don't really understand what's behind it, and you don't really see on the pill that there is some sophisticated science and technology going into this. Similar with GMOs, for instance. You can't really tell from looking at it that this is a GMO, but not always. There are some things that actually are visible to the naked eye, although I don't think they've had such a great impact, at least not yet. On the other hand, from an economic point of view, of course, there are already huge consequences. I can't vouch for this number. It's something I found in a recent report. $800 billion world market for prescription drugs, compared to Apple, $200 billion per year. So it's big. Pharma R&D worldwide, $150 billion. It's quite a lot of money. But actually, I found an interesting thing in a recent issue of Science where they had looked at NIH grants, and they had asked the questions, what number of NIH grants can you demonstrate has resulted in IP? And what they found was that there were about 10%, that's the dotted line, about 10% of all NIH grants were directly quoted as being the basis for a patent, an American patent, I guess, in this case. And about 30% of all NIH grants had resulted in publications that were cited in one way or another in patent applications. So even basic science, basic biomedical science, like funded by NIH, clearly has a direct impact on new products. But of course, life science has more mundane consequences in, say, wastewater treatment, beer brewing, and my favorite right now is this one. It's called Hot Shot. It's from a friend of mine in New York who is a neurobiologist. He's also an avid kayaker, and he always suffered from cramps when he was kayaking. And he and another neurobiologist kayaker friend, they came up with an idea of how to cure cramps. And basically what you do is you drink this stuff, Hot Shot. It's all natural product, so there's no problem of manufacturing it. And it basically goes into your esophagus, and it blocks it blocks nerve impulses from the esophagus. So it doesn't act directly on the muscles, but it acts on signaling pathways to the muscles. And apparently it works really well. So it's now used by major NFL clubs, for instance, to keep their players on the field when they get cramp feelings and so on. I think that's a great consequence. But of course, on a more conceptual level, how do we value things like Neanderthal DNA and everything it tells us about our prehistory, or all the insights into the tree of life that modern biology has afforded us? And maybe in the future, things like extraterrestrial life, if we ever find it. So clearly life sciences up to now has, over the past couple of 100 years, has taken us quite a bit from Linnaeus to the tree of life. And it will be very exciting to see what's coming up in 2057 and what people in 50 years' time will say when they come here. So with that, I think I should stop. And I don't know if there is any discussion here right now, or I think probably Bertil would rather we don't. So, okay, yeah. So I'll be happy to take a few questions.
I think it was brilliant and time. But I don't think you mentioned
yes.
the brain. The brain. I mean, okay, I'm Bertil Andersson. I'm the next speaker. I'm a typical Singaporean. So, what about the brain? I mean, many people say next decade is the brain, where we actually try to understand which is above our shoulders.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I was focusing on the molecular life sciences, and of course, you know, we've learned a lot about neurons and ion channels and stuff also from the molecular side, but clearly the brain is one frontier.
Maybe the interface between the brain and technology and computers and brain, I mean, it's maybe scary, but it's something you have to think about.
It's actually quite scary. So my son has a company to make VR games. And you put in these VR goggles, and it's actually scary, this kind of interface, how you're drawn into this alien world, right? And that's just the beginnings. So I think also the interface for sure, yeah.
My name is Sara Reggare. I'm a doctoral student at Karolinska Institutet at the Health Informatics Center, and also what I like to call a lead patient. So thank you for a very interesting presentation. I agree with it's a fascinating history we have behind us. But I would like to get your comment on another thing I was thinking about was another difference between life sciences and technology companies are the engagement of the end user. So what would you say in the challenges and what you think about engaging end users as patients more in the life sciences development?
Yeah, there's probably people here who can answer this much better than I. Maybe it's again a similar thing, you know. It's if you have a disease, obviously you're an interested end user, but otherwise you don't really see the stuff around you, right? You don't really realize how much is happening and how you could impact on this. Whereas if you use an iPhone.
Completely agree, but then since more than 50% of us now have chronic diseases, so we will more and more of us are patients, and more and more will be in the future.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that needs to change for it to be really, to bring the next great discovery in 2057 or whatever it was. Thank you.
It was rather a comment that Mats Wahlgren from Karolinska Institutet. So rather thinking of life today, what is the challenge? And there are actually microbes are challenges, and vaccines is an important challenge. Vaccine against malaria, HIV, tuberculosis, dengue, whatever there. These are very important new discoveries that are needed for the for the coming century. And so, of course, overpopulation is another.
My name is Anders Lönnberg. I'm the National Coordinator for Life Science. I was thinking that what you showed here is also not only what's the difference, but what's the same thing. And my reaction is that everything seems to be algorithms, and it doesn't really matter anymore if they are mechanic or biological ones. And what implications will that give us for the future?
I mean, of course, there is a great temptation to think of biology as a kind of algorithm or as a collection of algorithms, and it's a powerful metaphor. But I think it's probably one can also take it too far, perhaps, and just reduce ourselves too much to just algorithms, or think that we will be able to predict everything about human behavior, for instance, as just algorithmic. Maybe we can, but you know, we try usually in biology. We take whatever is the prevailing metaphor for what we see around us in the society. You know, it used to be mechanics, and so we looked upon bodies as mechanical building, you know, built of mechanical building blocks, and then it was computer science, and now it's becoming more, you know, algorithms. We equate the DNA with computer memories, for instance, and we try to think about what's going on in the cell in terms of the types of algorithms that we're familiar with. But we might have to get inspired I think in brain science, for instance, this is happening, that there is some feedback from brain science into algorithmics, trying to, seeing that there are other ways to do things than we thought maybe initially. So there's an interesting back and forth there, I think, between what we discover in biology and how we then, how we try to think about how this works and how we can implement it in, say, in computers.
So Göran Sandberg from the Wallenberg Foundation, don't you think that gene editing should be up there as a technology for the future?
Yeah, that's one technology for sure. But I wasn't thinking too much about the future because that's the job of the others. Right.
We're dangerously close to the future.
So I'm Johnson from MSD. Have you seen a trend when you look back to see towards more and more prevention? Because I think I see that if you go back to the earliest vaccines, you get more
Preventive
and more
medicine,
and more preventive medicine, a change that is coming and has been coming for many years.
Yeah, that's why we go jogging, right? So.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're probably right, but I'm not a medical person, so you should ask the medics.
I would like to ask a question, actually, and this may have to be the last one unless there's anyone else. So you've obviously worked quite a lot with method development for structural biology. So my question is more about, it's a little hypothetical or a little philosophical maybe, and when do you think that the technology has been pushed too fast sometimes, that there's a drive to have more powerful microscopes before we really know how to use the ones we have now? Do you see what I mean? That we spend resources on developing the technology when we should be spending resources on using what's there and understanding. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough call, I think. Maybe if you say sequencing, there's probably a lot of sequencing because it's so cheap now and so easy to do that if you really thought about it from a scientific point of view, maybe you wouldn't do quite all the sequencing that is being done. But on the other hand, I don't think one should intentionally sort of slow down the pace of technology development.
Maybe it's often a biological question that's pushing the development, I suppose.
Yeah. But I think it's always important to keep the biological question
Exactly, yeah.
paramount, right? Yeah.
Okay, I think we should thank Gunnar for a very interesting presentation.
So as you heard, I've been in Singapore. I've been in Singapore for 10 years, and of course it's been an interesting time to be in Asia when Asia does a quantum leap and be part of that, and I'm going to touch upon over those things. Before, I was also the CEO of European Science Foundation in Strasbourg, and that was a hard job to get 30 countries to think the same about research. And I remember when I took the job in Singapore, I was invited, interviewed both in Nature and in Science. Why, Professor Andersson, are you leaving Strasbourg, this high-level European job and the nice foie gras and the Alsatian wines, to go to Singapore? And then I said, and it was quoted, maybe in Singapore they act, and in Europe they talk too much. I said it as a joke, but it has been my reality, a very rewarding reality. So I'm going to give you some bits and pieces about that. I was also in Linköping for some years as rector, but of course the most thing I want to show with this, although I'm in Singapore, I'm a faithful Stockholm person here, working still with Life Sci Lab, which I think is an important investment for in the Swedish system. And I recently became on the board of KTH, so that's an interesting new endeavor. Singapore, for those who have not been there every day, I call it this where East meets West. It's a small country, it's a new country, it's a successful country, and it's highly multicultural, highly cosmopolitan, and diverse. Chinese in minority, but not only that. English is the working language, otherwise someone from Linköping could not be a president in that. And that's why I call Singapore is a little bit sort of Asia light. It's Asia for Westerners, you could say. It's open for Westerners. And it's interesting that there are many Chinese in Singapore that don't know how to speak Chinese. They only speak English. So it's really an interesting multicultural mix there. And of course, it's a rapidly emerging country when it comes to academia and research, including life sciences, of course. It's a rich country. It's about the same as Sweden. In 1965, when Singapore became a country, it was not rich. It was a poor country. So, of course, it represents a very dramatic evolution of a country, including the academic side. Just very briefly about my university, Nanyang Technological University. Also young, from 1991 only. And it has 33,000 students, 4,000 faculty, admin staff, and so on. It's ranked 30th globally in the QS, the oldest ranking. It's the first when it's young universities and number 3 in Asia. Of course, you can take rankings with a pinch of salt. But you have to remember, Asians love rankings. That's where the rankings are mostly considered. So I'm a little bit brain damaged now. So I believe in this. It's good. Of course, 1991 is the same year when Karlstad Universitet was founded. And they haven't come that far. So, of course, it is an impressive development of a young university, which is also very encouraging, that you can do it if you do it right in a short time. We have a feeling that academia, is gray, dusty, and things go slow. It doesn't have to be. So I think that's the message I want to have on that. You can take rankings with a pinch of salt, as I said, but in citation impact, which I believe is one quality parameter, maybe not the only one, but it's one, we are number 1 in Asia. 10 years ago, there was no research at NTU. What is the secret? People, of course. People, people, and people. Develop young people, recruiting top-level people from all over the world. So that's the secret, which is no secret. So the scope of my presentation, after warming up with some brags, and life science in Asia, I said that's a challenge. I'm just going to give you some hints. And in my definition of Asia, it's China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and Singapore. I have omitted India, which would be another major country one could have talked about. So I'm going to say what is being done, by whom, and where. Are there special profiles of life science in Asia, or is it just more of the same, so to speak? And trends, and societal and industrial impact. Many of you here represent that sector in society. So if you talk about Asian impact in life science, I thought we could take a Nobel Prize approach to it. And in 1986, it's been about 103 Nobel Prizes related to life science in one way or the other. Only, so far, 5 of them comes from Asians in Asia. Of course, there are many Asians who have gotten the Nobel Prize, but they've done the work in the States and Europe and so forth. But Asians in Asia are 5 in life science. And they all very recent also, I would argue. I mean, the oldest is Tanaka, this civil engineer at Shimadzu got the Nobel Prize. He was very baffled when we phoned him and said he got the Nobel Prize. And the CEO of Shimadzu thought he could go and fetch the prize, but we said no to that. Anyway, so of course, a especially interesting prize, if we talk about profile, is Yu Tun, who was the discovery of artemisinin against malaria, which is actually traditional Chinese medicine. And that, I will come back to that, is a special feature, one could say, of life science in Asia. As I said, Asians like ranking, and the QS have a life science ranking. And of course, we should note here that Karolinska is on the 7th, so the people here should look happy. And the highest ranked university in life is National University of Singapore in NUS. So this is, I'm the rector of the other university, so here's a little bit of a competition, you know. The University of Tokyo, University of Hong Kong, Seoul University, Kyoto University, National University of Taiwan. But you'll probably notice one thing here. Not a single yet Chinese university is up there yet, although I'm going to show you some slides that quantity-wise the Chinese is going full steam, but they still have on the quality aspects. So here is impact. This is publication, number of publications. Of course, that has limited value, but it still can be interesting to see. And here, of course, United States by far. But China is a challenger, as you say, and I guess if we meet here again in 10, 15 years, this may be changed, right? Japan, still going strong there. South Korea, which I'm very impressed by. Taiwan. And then you have Singapore and Hong Kong, which are the midgets in a sense, from a size point of view. But they're doing quite well. And if we look at institutions, the Chinese Academy of Sciences is biggest in the world, and they are leading the scene. Kyoto University is actually the highest in Japan. And I had planned to say this before. We talk about the rise of Asia, right? But there's also a reshuffling of Asia. I think most of us, when we talked about Asia in the early 90s, we knew one university, and that was University of Tokyo. They are not really in any top now. So many universities from China, Hong Kong, Korea, and Singapore has put them down. I think if you look at the Asian rankings today, Tokyo is number 7. So that is a dramatic change within Asia, which we sometimes forget about. And something else I would say about Asia, I think it's really fantastic that Asia in these 20 years has done this metamorphosis. Maybe 20, 25 years ago, we looked upon that as many as U-länder, developing countries. And today, they're on the front line of the knowledge society. And for me, as an academic, an old academic, I think that's one of the most fantastic things that has happened to us. Of course, it's more competition for us, but that is a quite narrow way of thinking. Globally, this is really fantastic, what's happening, and gives the whole globe hope in a sense. Yes, you can. There was some president who said that. I don't know if it was so successful. Yes, you can. Anyway, again, interesting curves. Again, we have the output curve. And 10 years ago, China took over Japan. But then if you look at, that is volume parameter, a quantity parameter, it would be citations. And interesting enough, it's like turning the output curve upside down. Because then Singapore is by far the number 1, and Hong Kong is number 2. The small midgets, of course, they cannot be so big as the giants, but obviously they do it quality-wise on a quite high level. And I think that's an interesting thing to remember. China, just some comments of China, the giant. And the giant, within the giant, is the Chinese Academy of Sciences, biggest research organization in the world. I mean, they own, for example, 5 universities. The trend, Chinese Academy of Science had traditionally been quite blue sky research, actually. But there's a big trend in change here, that they go more and more for applied research and innovation. This is what the Chinese leadership is going to use to put China at the forefront of new industry, new knowledge. It's a clear, and they're very proactive. They're contacting all other Asian countries to make deals with the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Something here in Europe we must be aware of. It's really a power set up in knowledge. Hong Kong, one of the midgets, but as I said, a lot actually is non-medical. Plant science, marine science. Marine science is big in Asia. And the TCM-based drug discovery, and I'll come back to that later on. Neurobiology, and Chinese University of Hong Kong do a lot of translational medicine, but also related to TCM. Taiwan, also Taiwan is a country that is sliding. So overall, Japan is stagnant, Taiwan is sliding. The other countries are going up in different ways. So that's part of the reshuffling I talked about of Asia. RIKEN, an institution where I'm symbolizing Japan by RIKEN, which is an institution I'm very impressed about, and I know Karolinska, for example, have very strong collaborations with Riken. And I think they are very good in the sort of triangle, big biology, engineering, and clinical sciences. I think that's a good position to be in. When you come there and you see 100 NMR machines parked next to each other, well, at least for a simple biochemist like me, that's impressive. So it depends what they do with it. South Korea is generally a country I think is really much on the move. Maybe more in engineering than life science, but still they are positioned there. Again, everything is not related to medicine, but to other. Advanced agriculture. The Asian population needs to be fed. Plant science is nothing peripheral there. It's important, and particularly rice, of course. There's a lot of research on that. Then we come to my Singapore. And life science was started with a big bang, say around year 2000. Mainly through A-STAR, which is a research institution. I call it the Singaporean Max Planck, you could say. Today, so Singapore has 3 big research areas. It's the 2 big universities. NUS is ranked 12 in the world, NTU 13 in the world. So it's quite fantastic that a country of 5 million can have 2 such renowned universities. The only country that can match this in Europe is Switzerland, by EPFL and ETH, also with a country around 7 million. I mean, you cannot compare it really with US and UK because of the enormous base. But if you look at small countries, Switzerland and Singapore are outstanding in this sense. Of course, the recruitment has been very top-level recruitment. Top-level recruitment of people from Asia, from US, Europe. I mean, I recruited, I think in 2009, an endowed professor from Caltech that resigned from Caltech and came to Singapore. And I can give many examples of this. So why does this happen? And why doesn't it happen in other countries like Sweden, for example? That the absolute top-level scientists come to a little country, Singapore, a new science country. Why? And I think a lot of policymakers around the world should try to answer that question. Why? It happens, but why? I'm not going to give the answers to it. I have some ideas. However, now, I would say that life science in Singapore have stagnated. Maybe stagnated on a high level, but still. And I think one of the stagnation is that there's been one failure, and I must give both sides of the coin, and that is big pharma and research by big pharma. Started with a big bang, but has basically stopped. It's only Glaxo, I think, that still have it. And for the Singapore mind to take 15 years from the bench to the bedside, that is too much for a country that is only 50 years. I think there's a lot of psycho behind that. NTU, at my university, and I show this to show that we have several top institutions. One led in structural biology with Daniela, who's going to say what I should have said if I have stayed, but no, you say what you want. and Per Nordlund, who most of you probably know from Karolinska. Lars Nordenskjöld was one of the pioneer Swedes that went to Singapore maybe 15 years ago. Stefan spends more and more time in Singapore these days. Sven Pettersson and Balash. And then we have Stefan Schuster. He's not Swede, but he's the one that have sequenced, I think, the mammoth gene and other things. He's a super genomics guy. But he also works here at Naturhistoriska Museet here in Stockholm occasionally. This guy is Stefan Kjelleberg. He got a grant for studying genomics and microbiology for 150 million Singapore dollars. And he had been professor in Gothenburg in the early 90s. And then he went for UNSW in Sydney. And I recruited him to Sydney. And I said, if you come to Singapore, it's halfway home to Gothenburg. And he bought that argument. So I have him there taking this center. Organizational research in Asia. I mean, here in Europe, we have a few, which I think are in the US interesting, like the Broad Institute, like the Crick Institute, and here in Stockholm, the Life Sci Lab. And I think these are important institutions where to tackle tomorrow's challenges in life science, you may have to go beyond today's institutions and combining the skills in order to reach competitiveness and critical mass. You cannot only do that, but that is one way to do it, and it is done both in the US and in the UK and in Stockholm, actually. I think that's an important. I'm chair of the Science Advisory Board, but also very important that we have such a thing here in Stockholm. Doesn't mean it's easy. It's hard. But you should do things that are hard in order to break new frontiers. So in Asia, they do that as well. Taiwan has a big center for cancer together with the MD Andersson Foundation. RIKEN have a global research cluster in systems glycobiology, including several universities. And of course, the Beijing National Lab for Molecular Sciences, under the auspices of the National Academy of Sciences, is really a big Singaporean effort. The Asian genotype, the Asian phenotype. Most life science biomedicine research has done on white males, right? And the Asian population have different diseases epidemiologically, and different diseases have different symptoms, different development, and different sensitivity to different drugs. Diabetes is one, for example. And this creates a lot of intention. And I have recently started a new medical school in Singapore at NTU, which is a joint institution between Imperial College and NTU. So why does almighty Imperial College leave the mundane quarters of South Kensington to go to Singapore? The answer is that Imperial College have 7 big hospitals in London. Hammersmith, St. Mary's, Chelsea, and there's one more. You probably can imagine how many Asian patients they have in these hospitals. That needs maybe different treatments, different disease progression, and so on. So for them, it was very tactical to have an educational foothold in Asia, in a multicultural, multiracial situation. At the same time, high-level academic level. So that also is not that they contribute or get money from the Asian government. They actually, from the Singapore government, but they also get new knowledge. And of course, this is something I think Swedish universities has to think. Our Swedish universities, I wrote an article with Jan Karlstedt Duke about are Swedish universities too Swedish? And I think that's an important question we have to ask. The answer may be different depending what you discuss. Karolinska is the university that was closest to establish themselves in Singapore, very close, and in the end it didn't work out, but at least the ambition was there. So the top universities in the world today are not regional. Science is never regional, of course, but when the institutions themselves also becomes international, I think that's an important trend we need to watch in this country and here in the Stockholm region, if Stockholm going to stay competitive in the life science sector. Of course, Stockholm is well positioned today, but it will take effort to remain that position clear. The Genome Institute, it's the genomic structure variations and so on. And of course, genomics will be the basis for precision medicine. And of course, the precision medicine in the Asian population going to be different from precision medicine in a Caucasian population. I think we need to understand that. And that's what the Chinese make themselves prepared for. There's another initiative led from NTU by Stefan Schuster, I just showed. There we're now going to sequence 100,000 Asians in various mixes. I mean, there's such a project in the US and one in the UK where you do this as well. So this is also part of collecting data. You could call it stamp collection, but it's stamp collection for a purpose, for better medicine. I mentioned TCM. And of course, when I came to Singapore and they talk about traditional Chinese medicine, I sort of say, is this really science-based research? And it's not, at least not completely. And I'm a plant scientist, of course, and such things we call phytochemistry, not traditional Chinese medicine. And I still call it phytochemistry, and some of the more traditional people in Singapore think I'm an arrogant Westerner, but I am. But culturally, it's really engraved among the population. Most Singaporeans would go to a TCM doctor. They would also go to a Western doctor, but they keep both options open, you know. So, and of course, it's a lot of interesting plant research can be done on secondary metabolites and their regulation and so on. So that's very good. And of course, when the Nobel Prize was given to UU for Artemisinin, of course, it was a way of sort of legitimizing traditional Chinese medicine. But, so it has made it to Stockholm, and that was symbolic for those involved in that kind of research. We must be aware of that. So Singapore and Hong Kong are key places where traditional medicine is being studied on a scientific level, I would say. I think that is important. And why is every country have their traditional medicine? Chinese medicine has a special position simply because they were the first who could write it down. So you have records of really ancient times, which from other cultures you don't. And that's why Chinese traditional medicine has a stronger position than other traditional medicines. I would simply cultural. Infection and immunity. We talked about vaccines before in the discussion, and a good part of Asia is tropical. Malaria, dengue, Zika. Even such a developed country like Singapore still have dengue outbreaks. Very problematic. So there's a lot of research going on in that, and there are many times are these influenza outbreaks come from Asia. Overpopulation is one reason, of course. So there's a lot of research going on here in infectious disease and vaccines, of course. Spending, let me finish by that. When I came to Singapore, Sweden was almost on the top of this chart together with Finland. We are still high, but not in the top. Korea, as you see, is very proactive. Singapore is fairly low, but the problem is that the GDP increases so much. So if you take the percentage, doesn't mean that it's not more money getting in. China also, but not super a lot from their GDP. China will pass the United States in some years. Japan is stagnant, as you see. Here are the countries that put percentage much more into life science. China is placing its own game. South Korea, again, the old giants, Japan and Taiwan, are the stagnant. So this also represents the reshuffling I talked about before. Western Europe, less. Pharma. This is big pharma doing research in Asia. If I had made a map of what manufacturing, it would be much, much more crowded. This is the research. Japan, Korea are still on the list. China is not that, maybe less than you would expect. Singapore, I said, now I have only GlaxoSmithKline. If I'd shown you a picture 5 years ago, it had looked much more vibrant. So this is a step back. More general slide I want to do, sort of 2 days before the French election. And UK, US have led a lot of the international knowledge. Are these countries staying a step back? What consequences will that? I will predict that Asia will take the lead in international science in the next 10 years. Inevitably, it's going to be so, because new resources and international openness. I gave a talk in Canberra 1 month ago where I actually said this. So Asia academia is open to international talent and mobility. China is, of course, supersizing, recruiting a lot, taking back Chinese diaspora. But a new trend, they start to recruit Westerners also to the labs in China. Because if you go to university today in China, they speak English, no problem. But of course, they are international for a national agenda. This one has to be clear about. Many universities are really intercultural exchange. Asian universities have more courses in English today, maybe more than Sweden. And also many, as I already said, Western universities are established themselves in Asia, not the least top universities. And the cultural barriers for living and working in Asia are declining. Again, these trends, Stockholm cannot pretend that this does not happen if Stockholm's going to stay competitive. So I guess that was all. Thank you very much. It's in 5 minutes.
Yes, Karin Dahlman Wright, Karolinska Institutet. So I think you touched upon this, but in a world of global, when Stockholm now lives in a world of global competition for resources and talent, how important do you think is to actually establish operations abroad? Because that is, and you know, we established operation abroad, but that was not easy, and it actually is partly a political decision because we are not allowed to use Swedish state money abroad. Yeah. So how important do you think this step really is?
I mean, the MITs, the Stanfords, and the Imperials of this world thinks it's important. And they do it. And I think one has to be cautious. It's not just to go to Hong Kong and be happy about it. It's a challenge. It's difficult. But because it's difficult, it's not an argument not to do it. No. So that's my view. And I think, I'm not sure if Högskolan I Dalarna should do it. But I think Karolinska Institutet, KTH, Stockholm University, certainly should have a discussion around it. I mean, I don't give stronger advice than that.
No, but I think I agree with you. Yeah. We should try it, but we should try it slowly, carefully, and well controlled.
Yeah. So, yeah. And also maybe in partnership.
Thank you for a very interesting talk and overview. Melvin Sams from Karolinska University Hospital. I've got one question about the education at your university. You talk a lot about attracting people from different countries. How do you see the education going forward?
I mean, the education in Singapore, if you take the schools in Singapore, they're ranked #1 in the world. Actually, my university education, the teachers for that. But education in Singapore is traditional, you could say. I mean, it's a lot of spoon feeding. But that is also changing. I heard this argument. You say, oh, but Singaporean kids, are they creative, or Asian kids creative? And I say, maybe not quite. But we should never sit down and think that that's going to be forever. That's also going to change. It's going to change rapidly.
So, Matthias Ullem from Science for Life. It's so fascinating to hear about Asia, but one thing is very interesting, and that is actually the I shouldn't say failure, but the fact that pharma is not moving in with the speed that we thought maybe 10 years ago, and actually is pulling out of Singapore and others. So what is the reason for this?
I think it could be, I mean, Singapore, in this sense, the biggest failure. I mean, when you look at China and Korea and Japan, that's probably going to happen. If the speed is going to be enormous, that's another question. And why is it? I think there's a certain kind of impatience, you know. It's new economies, very ambitious economies, and they want to have return on their money. I feel it's a different political mindset. That sometimes if you build highways and railroads and so on, it's in the benefit of these economies. But when it comes to pharma and things like that, it's another speed which they are not really adapted to in the mindset. That may also change. But it's sort of a reflection of the maturity of the academia, you could say, or in technology development.
If I get it right, you were allowed to terminate quite a number of scientists at Nanyang when you restructured the university.
It had been slightly more difficult in Linköping.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know, I didn't have time to go up to that. But of course, when I came, the board came and said, we are going to introduce a Western kind of tenure system. So you do a retroactive tenure analysis of all our 1,000 professors. And I did it with all the international panels and reference letters and so on. Very thorough process. And 25% had to go. And of course, that was also one of the reasons why we could recruit so proactively. And of course, many people say, terrible, how can you do something like that and you're Swedish and all that. But one has to realize, Singapore have 0% unemployment. It's not that these people came out on the street, but they probably did a better job in polytechnics and in the high school rather than doing education at the universities, because they had those people that we typically discontinued, were people that had done education but not done research, at least not research for the last 10 years or so. Of course, if we had some super teachers, we kept them. But otherwise, we had to go. And of course, I think you told me that I've cheated because I changed the engine in the car, right? Yes, we did.
I went to a course for new rectors when Hans Wicksell was giving his view on leadership. And I said the only way of restructuring university is by starvation. You can't terminate a research group or a department. You have to starve them. That takes 10 years. But obviously you didn't do that in Singapore.
No, I was allowed to do it, actually, you know. And I say it was not an arbitrarily process. It was a very thorough academic peer review driven process. So if you're going to do it, you have to do it right and fair, as far as mine is.
I think we have to stop it here.
Yeah, otherwise my wife would be very angry if I come too late for the wedding. Yeah.
1 minute, maybe.
I wanted to raise sort of another perspective. We talk about US, we talk about Europe, and we talk about everything that's developed. I think when we talk sort of a futuristic situation, we also have to talk about Africa, for example, which is one of the biggest continents with the most heterogeneous genomes in the world. They are more heterogeneous in each population than Europe is, and so many other diseases and so many other expressions of diseases that are inherited or genetic.
And also
we have to think of that. It might not be the good thing just to creep after the other ones to go to Singapore or go to Hong Kong. Maybe the most clever way of doing it is opening up something new. Think some other way around. For example, for SciLife, we could have a SciLife Africa. Why not? I think that would be where we could compare fruits and genomes of fruits, of animals, of humans, and all kinds of things of great interest for Sweden.
No, I could give a talk about life science in Africa. I just come back from there and then travel in various countries with a Singaporean hat.
Okay.
Because Singapore and China have a big presence in Africa.
Yeah.
Sweden not, you know.
But
I think Hans Rosling, our late colleague, would emphasize this, of course.
But we should not say so. I mean, Sweden has really pioneered research in Africa. The SARC, Swedish Research Council, was really
but they are pulling. The problem is that they are pulling out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a big problem.
Yeah. And of course, you, Karolinska and Makerere och så vidare, fantastic. But of course, high quality but limited. That will probably be a way to express it.
I think we step in and thank Bertil for a very interesting presentation.